All right. We have 4 members of the committee on the dais, so I'm going to call to order the May 10th, 2022 Loudoun County Board of Supervisors Finance, Government Operations, and Economic Development Committee meeting. This room has a hearing loop. If you need hearing assistance, switch your hearing aids to telecoil mode. If you need a headset, we have those available as well. Please see the clerk to request one. Committee members will have 3 minutes to ask questions for all items with as many rounds as we need. The proposed consent agenda is as follows. Item 3, award authority increase grounds maintenance equipment, countywide. We have Jeremy Payne and Steve Torpy on WebEx. Item 4, award authority increase construction support services for the construction of the Hallen Bernie Hansen Regional Park Project in the Blue Ridge District. We have Chris Bresley, Finance and Budget in person, and on WebEx we have Scott Warrist of DTCI. Item 5, contract renewal, public safety radio system maintenance and support services countywide. On WebEx, we have Cheryl Middleton and Sandy Lineberry from Finance and Budget. Item 6, contract renewal, portfolio and program management for capital projects countywide. Staff in person, we have Chris Bresley from Finance and Budget. On the WebEx, we have Nancy Boyd of DTCI. Item 7, the proposed revisions to affordable multi-family housing loan program guidelines countywide. Staff in person, Rebecca King and Sarah Etro from Housing and Community Development. Is there a motion? Well, I will move adoption of the consent agenda. Is there a second? Second by Chair Randall. All right. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. And that will pass 5-0. We're now moving to the information items. Item 1, monthly Department of Economic Development report, countywide. No PowerPoint presentation, according to my notes. We have Buddy Reiser from Economic Development and Kelly Foltman from REDC. Welcome, both of you, and
Good
we're
evening.
happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us tonight. First of all, I want to wish you all a very happy Economic Development Week. The International Economic Development Council established this week in 2016 to highlight in communities economic development and the importance of it. Frankly, we've never felt the need to have to celebrate that because we've always had such great support from the Board of Supervisors, from county administration, from the community in general. But I did want to say that we recognize the great support we have, and we thank you for that. We never take that for granted, so thanks. Starting with a good bit of economic diversity news, our team has been working with Catoctin Metal Finishing, who has secured equipment and SBA funding. They're looking to begin metal finishings and production in September of this year. They're investing more than $2 million in creating 8 new jobs in Purcellville. JLP Management Group is adding 50 new jobs to the county, and TechWish is adding 150 new jobs in Loudon. Both of those are technology consulting companies. Overall, for the fiscal year, we're at 119 wins, just over 6,000 jobs, and about $4.75 billion in new commercial investment. We just wrapped up a very successful Small Business Week, thanks to the board members that attended the effort. We really appreciate you coming out. It means so much to the clients to have the board members out and seeing you at these events. So thank you for everything you've done. We hosted a very successful Loudon Made, Loudon Grown theme night at the Loudon United game at Segra Field on April 30th. The event celebrated local farmers, and that has been included in our farmer trading card program. We highlighted a lot of businesses. On the heels of that, the Loudon Spring Farm Tour is coming up May 21st and 22nd, and I'm sure Kelly will be talking more about that. I want to thank Supervisor Brisman for coming out to the Loudon Made, Loudon Grown night. I know she stopped by every single booth, and a lot of the booth people said they were thankful to have her out there for that. We continue to expand our recruitment efforts in our clusters. Your item tonight gives an overview of our efforts in the cybersecurity cluster. We've been hosting regular gatherings with cyber professionals, and we have transitioned back into regular events in person. In fact, there's one going on right now. And as far as workforce, nationally, the economy added 428,000 jobs in April with unemployment near pre-pandemic lows. Hourly wages were up 0.3% last month and are up 5.5% from a year ago with the tight labor market. According to a report last week, the number of Americans that are unemployed are 5.94 million, with the number of job openings in America 11.55 million. So that reinforces the need for workforce retraining and upskilling, and I think it's going to be really important going forward for the economy. The Loudon unemployment level remains low, 2.2 in March. Inflation continues to be a major concern, with the price of both goods and labor rising at the fastest rate in about 4 decades right now. With that, you have the monthly report in your packet, and I'm happy to take any questions before we turn it over to Ms. Voltman.
Thank you, Buddy, very much. Any questions for Buddy? Chair Randall and then Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Reiser and Ms. Voltman, a couple of things. One, I'm in the process of writing my State of the County address, and I just completed writing the section on Loudoun's economy, and it almost wrote itself because it was so much good news to tell and so many wins, including the rural economy as well. And Mr. Reiser, one of the things I'm writing about in the rural economy is one of our newer industries, which is the drone industry, and why I think that can be a game changer for a lot of reasons in Loudoun's rural economy. Could you talk about the drone summit coming up this Friday, just a little bit, if you don't mind? And then secondly, I keep hearing that the price of goods are going up because of supply chain issues, and I thought I understood that, especially when in the heat of COVID. But I thought that as we got more people vaccinated and some of the COVID numbers eased down a little, although they're easing back up a little, the supply chain issues would ease up some as well. And they seem to not be doing that. Can you tell me what's going on with the supply chain issues?
I've read a lot about it, but it is a little bit hard to understand intuitively. There's still a lot of shortages coming out of other countries, in particular China. It's amazing when you start to think about how much of our supply chain comes out of China, and you still have the ships that are just backed up trying to get in. Shipments and cargo is down a lot of places from a lot of places. It's just a real challenge. We do think that this could last for a while, and that could be something that we might be talking about into the fall. But there is no real one single reason. Workforce plays a part. Materials play a part. Where supplies are coming from plays a part. So it's multifaceted and really quite complex. As far as the Drone Summit, we're very excited for the Drone Summit coming up this Friday. We have a very good set of speakers that represent all different facets of the drone industry. Loudon quietly has become kind of a leader in drones. And we think that there's real opportunity here. So that's the idea. We're going to start talking about what those opportunities are. How do we continue to grow across the county with this? And Madam Chair, thank you for offering to come and giving the introductory remarks.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you. I just wanted to compliment you and your team, Buddy, on the Loudon Made, Loudon Grown event at the soccer game. It was really enjoyable, and I spent a lot of money, and my son and I are fighting over the honey because I think it's very special honey, and I don't want him just throwing it in his smoothies. So I've hidden the honey in a special cabinet in my house. But no, it was really fun. It was a really nice day, and the llamas were adorable. Thank you.
Really do appreciate you being there.
All right, Kelly.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So just to let you know a little bit about what we've been doing at our monthly full meetings, we've had most of our members giving us updates on their business sectors and problems that they've had coming out of COVID. I would say for them, pretty much across the board, it is getting employees, and that is an ongoing problem from people from brownings to mom's apple pie and direct farm work. There's just not enough labor. Other things that we have discussed is the importance of land preservation with tourism and trying to marry that as much as possible, and encouraging the largest parcels for tourism businesses would be great. We've also heard from the Loudon Broadband Alliance, since that is a continuing problem. I was one of the poor people that had my internet down for an entire month when it was Sugarloaf decided that they were no longer going to be providing internet, so I had some direct influence on that one. We also had a question and answer with the Commissioner of Revenue around taxation, because there continues to be questions about taxation, especially for buildings that are not permanent structures on a farm. We've also most recently discussed questions posed by the Committee on Committees, and so we had that discussion at our last meeting, so that will be forthcoming from these guys. Our ad hoc, which was formed to be looking at the zoning, continues to meet monthly. We've also, in order to try to get most of our work done, started using part of our executive committee time for that committee, so that we don't add on to the burden of an extra meeting time for DED to attend. And Jeff Browning, who is our liaison on the ZOC committee, has been our conduit to put our questions in thus far. We are working on a white paper that we'll be discussing within the next 2 meetings, and then hopefully get it to the full RADC for comment and let them be looking at that. We're recommending that they be looking at those chapters right now, and it's that they can provide information. And we've also weighed in on both the ZOAMs for the prime soils and for the short-term residential rental.
Wonderful. Questions for Kelly? Chair Randall.
You just said something really important. You weighed in on the ZOAMs for the prime soil.
Well, I mean, we've been giving input back and forth for
To staff?
To staff.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then I will have that discussion with staff. What you just said about land preservation and tourism, are you what you're actually saying is for people to monetize their land for tourism issues if they have large parcels of land? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
what we would love to encourage is that larger businesses that are tourism related, if they are on parcels, that we encourage them to have the largest parcels possible.
Say that one more time to me, Kelly.
So that we can have larger parcels be part of the tourism industry, right? Instead of saying that 5 or 10 acres is going to be a tourism, if we can have 50 or more acres, we're more likely to reduce the number of houses that can go on.
But to do what on the parcel? It's part of the tourism industry in what?
We're not suggesting a different industry or any, whatever. I mean, if it's a vineyard or a brewery or whatever.
Okay.
That we would love to see larger parcels going into those businesses. Any of them.
I understand.
Any of our businesses.
I understand. Okay.
Right?
All right. Our horses?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the larger parcels question, are you saying that are you making a recommendation in the ZOR process that we not have businesses on smaller parcels if that's all the owner has?
If that's all the owner has, no. I mean, we're not going to change anything that is current anyway. We're also having recommendations that there are some recommendations that horticultural activities need to be on larger parcels, and some small horticultural operations would be perfectly fine on a small parcel. They sort of have lumped those into livestock, and livestock, we can understand that there's a stocking rate, right? We don't want to overstock land with too many animals on it because you're going to end up denuding the land. But for smaller operations, flower operations, anything like that, then that should be allowed on smaller parcels. On parcels that are relying on a lot of tourists coming in, it would be lovely if we could have even larger parcels, and encourage that, because that's going to have a bigger impact on reducing the number of housing developments that are going up, right?
Are you saying that? Are you suggesting that there's going to be a minimum size for like a winery or a brewery?
The only minimum size there is right now is 10 acres for a brewery. And wineries are pretty much dictated by the fact that they have to produce 51% of their grape production. So,
Gotcha. What would you consider a small parcel?
I would consider a small parcel 5 to 10 acres.
5 to 10, okay.
So because our zoning is 20 or 40, right? So it would be nice if we could at least encourage most parcels to be close to what our zoning is.
Gotcha, okay. And then I noticed you have a meeting scheduled where you're going to be briefed on the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan. What was the interest in the REDC in the unmet?
We had done that before with the interest mostly on farm worker housing, which is also part of the zoning.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Buddy. Thank you, Kelly, very much. And we're going to move on now to item 2, quarterly report, FY 2022 third quarter financial update, economic report, cash proffers, and debt report. And we have staff in person, Caleb Whites, Megan Bork, John Sandy from Finance and Budget. Oh, thank you all for being here. Yeah.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Thank you for having us. Just a few things to highlight in the staff report. Starting on page 2 of the item, table 1 at the bottom of the page, that shows the projected positive variance in fiscal year 2022 at the end of the year. So as of the end of the third quarter, we are projecting a positive variance of approximately $67 million. This is an improvement of about $5 million from the second quarter. One of the other things I'll just note about the item in general is in the fall, for the first quarter report in November, we did introduce a new item format. A lot of the economic data that had previously been in the body of the item is now included in an attached economics report. So that report is included in attachment 1 and is available for the committee to review. Just a couple highlights on the revenue side first. So if you look at table 2 on page 3, you can see we're projecting about a $27 million positive variance for general property taxes. There are a number of things going on there. First, in real property tax, we are projecting a positive variance in that line item specifically of about $35 million. For personal property tax, in the aggregate, we are projecting about $8 million of underperformance versus our revised budget. But I'll stop on that a little bit because there's a couple things going on with that. First, on the business tangible personal property tax side, we are projecting about $30 million in lower revenue, mainly attributable to a lower computer equipment than had been forecast in our revised forecast in July of 2021.
Caleb, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but could you clarify whether this lower number is lower than we had forecast or lower net from the previous year?
So just so we're all on the same page, I'll kind of walk through that. So we had forecast, I think, a $60 million lower variance from the adopted budget. And the preliminary levy information indicates that business personal property will be approximately $30 million lower than that revised forecast that was done last summer.
So it's not that the tax revenue is lower than it was before, it's that it was lower than we had predicted?
Correct.
All right.
Yes, it was still a substantial gain over the previous year.
All right.
Most of that in the aggregate, though, most of that personal property loss on the business side is being made up for with higher than anticipated vehicle taxes, even after accounting for the 80% assessment ratio that the board adopted in March. Under other local taxes, sales tax continues to strongly overperform versus budget, as well as continued strong performance in recordation tax. And we do now have the filings for BPOL, and that came in about $3 million higher than budget as well, which is a good sign of the health of our overall economy. For the expenditure forecast, the only significant change from last quarter is an increased projected savings in personnel. That is due to higher than usual vacancies. In the previous item, Mr. Reiser highlighted the tight labor market. The county is no exception to that tight labor market. We are experiencing longer times to fill positions, fewer qualified applicants per recruitments, and other challenges in recruiting for a number of positions, which, like I said, we think is reflective mainly of the tight labor market here in Northern Virginia. That, I think, is the only significant variance from the second quarter to highlight. On the expenditure side, like I said earlier, we have included as attachment 1 an economic report. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, Supervisor Letourneau.
So let's go back to the anticipated topic of discussion, which is the additional $30 million. So I think you kind of explained what happened, but not necessarily why. Do we have any additional insight? I know that there had been a lot of work done to understand the $60 million shortfall, but now that it's 90, I mean, there was a theory that COVID had kind of slowed down refresh cycles on data centers, but
So I'll preface what I'm about to say is we have preliminary information at this point. There are some detailed reports that we are still waiting on to analyze to look at deeper topics such as the exact replacement year of the computer equipment. We don't have that detailed yet. We have had some preliminary conversations with the industry. I think there are a few factors that continued through calendar year 2021 due to COVID that impacted outfitting timelines. So Mr. Reiser in the previous item spoke about supply chain issues. Generally, the feedback we've heard from the industry is that server equipment itself has not been a significant supply chain issue through the pandemic. But what we have heard feedback on recently is that other supporting equipment, the electrical equipment that goes into the data centers to be able to outfit it with servers, has experienced supply chain delays, as well as the tight labor market has impacted some of the specialized workers that data centers need to get into outfit. But we are going to continue to work to refine our forecast. This is the information we have at this time indicates it's not nearly as large of a miss versus the previous year, but this is a volatile revenue
well, I was going to
source.
ask, so what are the implications for FY23?
So at this point, we don't have enough information to indicate that in the aggregate, there's a serious revenue problem for FY23. Like I said, our initial information is this is not the same situation as last year. We're going to continue to work on refining our forecast over the summer as more data becomes available to better understand trends with this revenue source. Staff will continue to highlight that this is a volatile revenue source that's much more difficult to predict than almost any other revenue source that the county has, which was the basis for the tax policy recommendations that the FY23 budget was based on.
Chair Randall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect, Mr. Letourneau, I don't think we had a $60 million I think we had an $80 million shortfall, and we used some of the COVID money to fill that. It was 60, I thought it was 80, and we used 20 million of the COVID money. It was a 60 to begin with?
So both of you are correct. So he said 60, I think.
He said 60, yeah.
And so it was 80.
It was 80.
And we did a couple of things. We lowered the capital budget by $24 million, so that reduced it down to 60.
Right.
And then we did do other things, including 20 million of ARPA
Right.
funding for revenue to cover part of the revenue shortfall, and then.
So thank you. So that's actually $110 million, which is significant.
No. we were.
No, I mean with the new 30.
No, it's.
Can we stop my time, Madam Chair, where he explains this to me like I'm
Yeah, Jenny, could we stop the chair's time, please? Thank
So
you.
their numbers are going, I believe, from budget to actual. Correct. So we revised the budget down by $24 million.
When it was adopted in
Right.
April of 2021, yes.
So we revised the budget down.
So then what's the total amount
For the shortfall
for the shortfall?
is, I think you're using off of the revised number, correct? So it's 90.
Correct.
Okay,
90
so,
off the revised number.
but I still don't get why it's not, so if,
So they reviewed,
because they didn't include that initial 60, because they revised that?
we revised.
I'm sorry, the initial 20 of the 60, because they revised that?
We revised the budget down to 60.
Right, but,
And so.
I know, but it still started off as 80. It still started off as 80.
If you're using 80, then it's 10.
Oh, then it's 110.
No.
What?
So we started off at 80 million short.
Okay.
We are now 90 million short.
Because of revised.
No.
I'm so
We
confused.
revised the budget. We revised the budget down.
That's
So-
what I just said.
Correct. But we revised the budget to 60. They're now saying they're at 90. So they're 30 million. They're short an additional 30 million.
Additional 30 million.
Correct. So it's 90 million total. So if you.
Because you revised it down to 60, it's 90 million total.
Correct. So.
Okay, but if you hadn't revised it down to 60, it was still the initial shortfall was 80. And then you revised that down to 60.
Right. So you add.
Okay, but I'm not talking about what was revised. I'm talking about before we revised it down, it was 80 plus a 30.
So it's 90.
90 total now. Okay. All right.
So if you use the original $80 million number, it's 10 million more. But once we reset it, it became 60 because we reset it to 60.
Because you revised. Okay.
The total amount's still 90 though.
Correct. That's my understanding.
I don't understand
start
that.
time
I
again.
don't. We got to do that offline because I am totally confused. Okay. Having said all that, this is actually my question. When we actually came in with the 80 million that was revised down to 60 million, one of the questions I asked at the time was, are we going to see this as an issue year over year over year? Because, one of the supply chain issues, but two, the data centers really realize that they can keep some of their equipment longer, so then the value on it. So my question is, why have we started forecasting things differently since we're in a new kind of market, since we're looking at things differently? Have we started forecasting things differently? And even as we forecasting differently than we have in the past, we're still coming in $30 million shorter than the forecast.
Chair Randall, we had a complete overhaul of how we forecast computer equipment tax for tax year 2022. So this levy that you're seeing the information in this item for. We changed a number of assumptions in our forecasting model. You mentioned in your question the amount of time that server equipment is in place in data centers has lengthened. So those are the types of
And even with
issues
that, we still came in lower than we forecasted.
That is correct. And this highlights it's a volatile revenue source to forecast. And our forecasting efforts are something that we will continue to revise year over year because as the industry, this is an industry that trends change and we have to stay on top of where those trends are going.
But will we always be behind? I mean, so we forecast and then we change and then we forecast again because the forecast came in lower. I mean, are we concerned about that?
So what I'll mention is like I said, we had a wholesale change in our methodology of how we forecast computer equipment tax over this past year. We only have one hard data point a year to understand the performance of that forecast. So we will probably be making additional changes based on some of the information we plan to go through this summer.
Okay.
Chair,
All right, Mr. Hemstreet.
So I think we need to be careful about reading too much into these numbers from the last 2 years, because as Mr. White's just pointed out, we get one data point a year, which is when the equipment gets assessed. And so unlike sales tax and other consumer-based taxes where we get numbers monthly, we get one assessment once a year, which is based off the filing. So and we have approximately 10 years total of experience in this revenue stream, because if you recall, when we go back and we look at the PFM study, which you saw in the fall of last year, you got one data point a year. We've got about 2013 is when we really started in earnest with this revenue stream. Now, what we know about the past couple of years is we went through the pandemic. You just heard from Mr. Reiser about continuing supply chain issues coming out of China and other countries. And so all of those variables together make the last 2 years and revenue projections, particularly in this industry, difficult, because it's hard because we don't know if some of these trends are actual trends or if they're being impacted by other variables, like sort of, for example, the inability to get certain parts because the supply chain is impacting the ability for manufacturers to get things and then for supplies to be delivered to market. There's also, because of that, some speculation out there about how quickly square footage has been added, which is a parameter that has been a key portion of our revenue forecasting methodology in the past. And so I think what we've tried to say to the board the last couple of years is, A, it is a volatile revenue source to begin with because we're trying to predict the value of tens of millions of individual pieces of computer equipment. And so that is also devaluing or deappreciating in value at the same time. And we're also trying to predict how many new pieces of equipment are being added at the same time with an approximate value. So it is a little tricky under normal circumstances, but then when we we add into that the variables coming from the vagaries of the pandemic, it makes it a little more tricky to come out with a perfect number. Now, having said all that, I just want to place this into context because the total revenue budget is something like $2.5 billion. So, Megan, $2.2 billion. So, the number that we're dealing with, we're able to absorb. And so we're making the changes that we need to make within the budget. So we should not run into a point where we have a critical failure or a problem, but we are monitoring it. So I just want to also make sure we place that in perspective, because it's one undervalue of a total portfolio, which is much, much larger.
Thank you. Just one, I guess, clarification question and comment. I think for the members of the Finance Committee and for Budget and Finance staff, the term volatile makes sense. But for a layperson, when you hear the word volatile revenue source, you think, okay, it's going down to less than it was last year. That is not the case with the tax on business personal property tax when it comes to computers. So, Caleb, I recall you said during this meeting that the tax revenues are going up, just perhaps not as much as we had anticipated.
Yes, that is correct. The overall levy for between tax year 21 and tax year 22 increased by, I think, approximately $80 million when you look at computer equipment. So it is a significant growing revenue source, and I appreciate you pointing out the wording there, because what I want to be clear on is it is as Mr. Hemstreet was explaining, it's the difficulty in forecasting the revenue compared to other revenues, which we have much more experience with and are much more stable. As Mr. Hemstreet said, it is a lot of difficulty to sort out what are COVID trends, if you want to call them that, versus other trends in the industry. So I do want to be clear, it is difficulty in forecasting, not that the revenue source is declining at this point.
Thank you very much. All right, with no further business to conduct, I call this Finance, Government Operations, and Economic Development Committee meeting adjourned.